Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Writer's Gym. It's Dr Rachel Knightley here, PT of the Writer's Gym, freelance coach, author, creative writing lecturer, and reader, most importantly. And I'm very excited to be here with my lovely client, Sarah. Sarah Bax Horton is an award-winning true crime writer and researcher who is appearing in Lucy Worsley, Victorian Murder Club on BBC Two and iPlayer. The three-part miniseries is based on the subject of Sarah's second book, Arm of Eve, investigating the Thames Torso Murders, for which she won the RBAM, Ripperology Books And More Book of the Year 2024. Fascinated by genealogy, Sarah's discovery of a Whitechapel police ancestor inspired her identification of Jack the Ripper in One-Armed Jack, uncovering the real Jack the Ripper. Sarah, one of the joys for me of reading that bio is I can absolutely see how this person's interests, life come together as this career. That feels like a really joyous thing.
It was just incredible for me a few years ago in 2017 to make this discovery that I had a Victorian ancestor, Harry Garrett, who was a Metropolitan Police Sergeant who worked on the Jack the Ripper investigation. And this was so extraordinary to me, and I was so fascinated by it that I gave up my job as a management consultant and I decided to write a book in his honour.
That is so wonderful to hear. I so love hearing when the best decisions are not the safe decisions, because when I left a sensible job that was actually making me miserable to go and do some things that didn't exist yet, there are scary moments, aren't there? As well as we can see it's all worked out. We can see in hindsight, yes, hurrah. Was it nerve-wracking at first to do the change?
I just knew it was the right thing for me. I was in my late 40s and I was at the time in my life when I thought, what do I really want to do with my life? Because my time is precious and it's more precious the older you get. And I just thought, this is what I really want to do. I really want to write a book. It's all about my police ancestor. It was originally conceived as a memoir across 5 generations of my family. And as you will realise, it changed into a Ripper book. And yes, it did feel risky, but I just thought I have to do this because what am I going to do? You know, do I want to sit in an office all day for the rest of my working life and then do what? And I just knew it was right. And I think also there are times in your life when you know you've reached the end of a particular phase and it's quite scary starting afresh or trying to find out what that is. But when the path is laid out for you, as I felt mine was, and I felt I firmly knew that it was what I wanted to do, then things fall into place. But you do have to have the courage of your convictions, because when it's your debut book, people secretly don't believe that you're going to get published or possibly even finish it, or maybe even that it might not be any good. And so you have to really be firm to yourself. You have to convince yourself before you convince anyone else that you're totally committed to the project. It's what you really want to do and that you're capable of completing it. And if I'd needed to self-publish, whatever I needed to have done, I would have done that. So it wasn't as though I was holding out for a particular publisher or for a particular way of achieving it. It was more, I'm going to write my book, I'm going to see what it comes out like, and then I'm going to see what options are available to me. And I think you've got to journey on your path without necessarily knowing where you're going.
Before we get to journeying on that path and looking at what the options are, I was really interested to hear you say it started as a memoir of 5 generations, and evolved into the concept that we know now. What was that part of the journey like, where you're listening to what the book needs, you're finding maybe there's more than one book in here? What was that like for you?
It was essential to me to start with the family connections. That was what I was interested in. That was what triggered the whole idea of the book. And I went on the Faber Academy memoir writing course. Prior to that, I went on Morley College in Lambeth's memoir writing course. And I was really learning how to write a book. And I was researching my family history and trying to make this memoir into a coherent whole in which all of the different personalities across the 5 generations, including myself, had echoes and resonances across our lives, even though we didn't know each other. I didn't even know my grandfather on my paternal side because he died in 1946. So you're learning about people who feel very close and intimate, but about whose lives you know very little until you start researching them. And as long as you have either family stories or photographs, or you can find footprints of them across the official records, then you start to have something. And although that wasn't actually the book that I wrote, it's totally informed all of my work ever since, because it's important to me to have that grounding in my family and to understand who my police ancestor really was, which I feel I've achieved.
There's something, I think, for all kinds of writers in that, isn't there? That there may be a book that we need to write that gets us where we are, and maybe that book will go out into the world, or maybe, as you're describing, it will be the foundation for other books that go out into the world.
I think that's totally right. I think many debut writers do not publish their first book as originally conceived. My first book is really my second book. I realised that my first book sort of didn't really work as a concept. It was very interesting to me and maybe to my family, but not really to anybody else. And I also became quite fascinated by the Jack the Ripper investigation, all of the challenges which it posed to the Victorian police, and how that would have affected them and my great-great-grandfather. And I started to realise that I could write a Ripper book that was very much informed and inspired by my family, and actually reinvestigate the case, which I suddenly decided I wanted to do. I felt that I could bring a fresh modern take to it. I love research and analysis. And I started to look at who Jack the Ripper really was. And I discovered that the police of the day stated publicly that they had solved the case and they knew who the killer was, but they were unable to bring him to justice. And as soon as I discovered that, I was on the trail of something momentous. And I thought, well, who did they think he was? And that is the subject of my first book.
So that idea of having a foundation layer or foundation stone, if you like, that first book that isn't the one the world sees, but it's given you something very important, you and your family, the people that you choose to share it with. And then the books that follow are that bit stronger for having those foundations. Are there any particular examples you'd be up for sharing about how that played out, how having the book about your family, we can now read in What Came Next?
I think in many ways, my Ripper book is still about my police ancestor. I had a very interesting female reviewer who said she could feel my family connection and my inspiration of my great-great-grandfather and that connection through the whole of her reading of the book. In fact, I only really mention him at the beginning, in the introduction, very sparsely throughout. And then at the conclusion and in the epilogue, I write quite a lot about him. And I thought my readers get it. They understand the dedication. You open the book, it's dedicated to Harry Garrett. It is all about him. If I hadn't found out about him and my connection to the case, I would never have written a Ripper book. In fact, people who know me well are quite surprised that I now write books about serial killers. But I think people are only surprised if they don't understand that I'm inspired by my my police ancestor. And if they get that, then I think they understand a lot of the context of the book. And it is there in the content. And in terms of like a real specific, I did a lot of research about Harry Garrett's police career. And I discovered that in October 1888, at the height of the Ripper Scare, he was on night duty as station sergeant at Lemon Street Police Station in Whitechapel, which is Ripper headquarters. And there was a house fire in the building opposite. And he and other men ran up the smoke-filled stairs to rescue a family of 11, to lead them out to safety. They carried out an elderly servant. So he saved lives. It was incredible to me. This was real heroism. This means more to me than what he may or may not have done patrolling the streets of Whitechapel on the Jack the Ripper investigation. He received a Commissioner's Award and a guinea and a certificate from the Royal Society for the Protection of Life from Fire. And that is really the ultimate fact for me about my police ancestor. But of course, I write books about the police work of the day.
And is there a temptation to do more of that?
He emigrated to Canada in the early 1900s, as did his whole family, all of his adult children, and so on. I think I'd like to write a travelogue. I think I'd like to go to Canada, go to Toronto, and just have a slightly different experience of working out what their life was like over there. He didn't die there. He actually came back to Leicestershire with his second wife, who was from Leicester originally, and he lived and died at Birstall, and he's buried in the church graveyard there, which I visited. So this is the sort of thing that brings me great joy, is to go to the places where possible.
That's a really, really beautiful example of what could happen next as well. You mentioned a few minutes ago about when it was ready, when you knew what it was you had, that if you did not find the right publisher or the right publishing agreement, you would have self-published. It was about getting it into the world. But I'm hearing a lot of clarity involving what it was, who you wanted. Can we talk about how you worked out what it needed or approached publishers?
The Faber Academy course was very useful because they talked about agents and publishers. And I found that a very useful stepping stone. But I had a writing mentor at the time, not unlike you actually, Rachel, but this was some time ago. And she endorsed my approach to write the book first, because when you're a debut, it's actually very difficult to sell off proposal. And particularly when you're writing a Ripper book, you have to have a really good hypothesis that is fully understood by the agent or publisher. And I think it's very difficult to do that short form. So I wrote the book, and I knew that at the end I'd be able to work out what to do with it. I was very, very lucky because I got a very good agent, Andrew Loney, and my first book was published by Michael O'Mara Books. They all really understood my hypothesis. They liked my research. They understood the family connection and that it was really different, that I'd brought something really different to them. Not your typical Ripper book, a new prime suspect, a new hypothesis. I did things like the true crime reconstructions in my book, which is unusual. I think I was very fortunate. But I was also very persistent, and also you have to believe in yourself. If you don't believe in yourself, then nobody is going to just automatically believe in you. And you have to be able to describe with truth and authority what you've been doing and where you're heading.
And it's so valuable, I think, for people to hear that you came from a different career path. You very actively acknowledge to yourself, what I want is to write a book. In fact, what I want is to write books. and moving towards that, and the active, I'm going to invent a word now, the activeness of how mentally we need to approach that is not to be sneezed at. As you say, a lot of people are on a path and stay there. Every time we actively say, I am going to go on a different path, it takes a great deal of strength, commitment. It is never the easy option. And I would love to ask you, for the people out there who maybe have this in the back of their mind or are approaching a change, be it when they're sort of our age or there's no time when this is easy, so potentially younger or potentially older. Is there anything you would say to those people?
I mean, I just think you need to be ready to take a change, and you need to be supported, and you need a plan. And someone very clever once said to me, you've got your plan A, Sarah, but what's your plan B? And it can be very helpful to have a fallback plan if what you're seeking doesn't quite go as you'd imagined, and then you've got another option in your back pocket. I think you have to be firm in yourself, and I think you need to have a true inspiration or motivation, whatever that is, that really works for you personally, that you can go back to and you can remind yourself. You know, for me, I was writing a book in honour of my great-great-grandfather. That was what I really wanted to do. For other people, it may be something totally different, but equally valid. But I think you need something to pull you through. I think it's quite a difficult process. It's important to have a sort of sense of joy and a sense of purpose. And then I think that will carry you through.
Something else that you mentioned, which I deeply agree with, is the need for the resilience, that it may not happen immediately. You know, the first agent that you have in mind or the first batch of submissions that you go through, if that doesn't happen, that doesn't mean the whole thing isn't going to happen. And there's resilience, but there's also patience, I think.
I agree. I mean, I had the idea to write the book and started in 2017, and my first book was published in 2023. That's quite a long process. Clearly, I tried writing 2 different books in that time. I acknowledged that I needed to learn how to write a book. I went on 2 quite significant training courses. I met other writers. I sought sources of support from across the industry. I met agents. I did all sorts of things, but I treated it as a learning experience. It wasn't like my book is now perfect. I know exactly what I'm doing. It wasn't sort of like a very linear, you know, swift as an arrow like process. It was a journey, but I think for me it was a very emotional journey. I was really understanding a lot about my family. Whenever people talk about their family and their history, they're really talking about themselves, you know. We're all really seeking self-knowledge and understanding and to make sense of things that have happened to us in the past. And I was on this massive journey of self-discovery and trying to write a book. And it was huge, really. So I think sometimes we have to acknowledge that we've taken rather a lot on and be kind to ourselves as well.
Absolutely. Because particularly when with writing about the things we care about them an awful lot. It is going to be a very big thing to carry regardless. But you mentioned something that obviously is key to my life as a coach, as a coachee, as a writer, as a friend, family member, etc., is that it is so vital to understand that it's not my writing is over here, my life is over here. If I'm growing in one area, I will be growing in another. And if I'm shutting down in one area, I am shutting down in another. And I don't know if this is what you'd say to previous version of you, but something I do feel I would say to a previous version of me is it's okay. It's okay to not know what's going to happen next. It's okay to still be learning, making mistakes, feeling vulnerable, because this is exactly where and how we grow. And I don't believe we ever quite arrive at that knowledge. Or we might when we're talking about a friend, we might when we're talking about somebody else, but with ourselves, I feel like that is a discovery that needs to be a rediscovery, that we need to keep sort of forgiving, reassuring ourselves every day, is how I've felt.
I agree. For me, I've always been something of a hobbit-like creature on a quest. And I suppose for me, the whole book and the whole family history exploration has been an adventure. And when I go to the library or the archives or I do online research, I am essentially having an adventure. I don't always know what I'm going to find. I don't know how I'm going to use it in my writing. Sometimes I find really significant developments which push my writing in a different direction or change my understanding of my subject. So for me, a sense of adventure helps me, as well as inspiration from my family and the strong desire to be creative. And I think that's all sort of merged for me. But I think it's very individual. I think another person would not understand my hobbit-like quest and be on a completely different path.
And that's almost the point, isn't it?
That's the point.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that image. And some conversation that you and I have had in the past is about the importance of setting, that trying to get your brain to do its thing in a place that isn't working for you puts an awful lot of extra pressure and obstacle into the process. Whereas when you find, so some people we know are coffee shop people, some people are reading room people, etc. Some people work from home, etc. Finding what does it for you is very important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I do alternate location. I alternate what task I'm doing. Am I doing writing? Am I doing researching? Am I doing editing? Is it planning? Is it background research so I understand my subject better? And there may be some gems that come out of that. I'm quite flexible. I do what's required of me at the time. If it's better for me to go to the British Library and really focus, because I can't then go and look at what's in the fridge or roam my flat looking for random chores I've decided are preferable than sitting at my desk, then I plan that in. So I have got better now at managing my writing process and thinking, well, what am I doing? What phase am I in? How's my concentration? What's the best way of managing it?
I really love that managing, but it's also recognition, isn't it? It's not saying I should be this kind of writer or I should be able to, concentrate in this circumstance. If fundamentally that is not you, it's finding a way to work with what is you to make your life suit you.
It's certainly very individual. I mean, if anybody ever asks me about my process or whatever, I'm happy to tell them, but I'm really clear that this is not going to work for anybody else. This is the way I do it because it works for me. What works for someone else might be something totally different. And they may also have different constraints. They may be doing things in a particular way because it works for their entire situation and within whatever relationships and commitments they already have. And I think you've just got to make it work for you. It doesn't matter what it is,
When I was at my most anxious or struggling to work from home, one of the things I did when it wasn't candle weather, because I like using candles for this, is I would have an imaginary candle. I would babysit an imaginary candle because when you're burning a candle, you can't go off and do the washing, go for a walk, get distracted, go on the phone or anything, because it's a candle. It's a fire hazard. I need to babysit it. So when it wasn't an actual candle, I had an imaginary candle. And that was sort of one of the peace offerings I gave my brain, in a way, that time was still being measured, the candle was still burning, or this will take so long and then I'll go and do something else. But I think, although I absolutely so agree with you that it is so important to understand that our process is not a right or wrong thing, that all writers will do things slightly differently, and it is about finding what's for you. I think one thing a lot of us have in common is there can be an anxiousness around time, which is a very complex and big thing for all of us as humans, because we do know time is limited and we will worry or fret about how we're using what we have. I'm wondering is there anything you would say to maybe a more early career in writing you, or that you'd say to other people out there about how we speak to ourselves around that?
I think it's definitely about quality, not quantity. I mean, in terms of time, not words as well. I mean, I think sometimes you need to accept that life takes over for whatever reason. And you need to give yourself permission. This is one of your great words, Rachel, to say, well, today I need to do the medical appointment. I want to do whatever. I'd like to catch up with someone. These are I want to plan my weekend. These are things I want and need to do, and I'm going to do them. And today isn't a writing day. Because people say to me, don't you write every day? There's this thing. And I'm a bit like, well, how can you write every day? Do you not have days where you get up and you need to go out for the day? I mean, I don't fully understand it. Maybe I'm being too literal here. I think you have to give yourself permission for things. I mean, it's a vocation, isn't it? It's not a job, really. I'm not saying it's not something one does all the time. Of course one does. But in terms of being vocational, maybe you do need to be a bit inspired, and maybe you need to be kind to yourself.
It's an interesting one, the write every day thing, that there are some people I've spoken to who it absolutely infuriates when they hear the write every day thing. Everybody's got something that really annoys them. That's the thing that really annoys several people that I speak to or have spoken to. With me, I think what I quite enjoy is I do believe I am a writer, the way that I'm also Jewish, British, American. I do believe it is an ingredient. And even if I am not writing, there will be a thought that happens during the day that I would always rather I had caught in the net, in the phone notebook, in a notebook. I don't think, and I may be wrong, but I do not think a day passes where that doesn't happen. I mean, there are people like Ramsey Campbell, who I love listening to, that he does very literally write every day. And something that I do identify with is that I think you get a nicer Rachel in the world. You get better Rachel for your money if I have written than if I haven't written. Do you feel better for having written?
So I feel better for having taken the notes, because I have a lot of passing thoughts and I get inspired by things I read. So I do the notes and I feel better that I know that everything is captured and I can go back to it. In terms of the writing and the research, I do know what you mean. There is a real sense of satisfaction of being in the middle of a piece of work and also knowing what you need to do next. So you're sort of in the flow. So you can put down your writing and then you can pick it up and you know exactly where you are. And I feel where I sometimes get a little bit of trouble is where I've sort of finished something too cleanly and then I'm not quite sure what my next bit is, or I have to do some research, or I have to go through my notes and I have to sort of re-find a starting point. And I possibly get a bit niggly around that time because it's like I don't really know what I'm doing at that time and I'm not in the flow. And so then it's harder for me to settle when I'm starting to write on any particular day. So I'm having to sort of manage that by leaving a little trail for myself to say, this is what you're doing next, or these are the questions you really wanted to answer that you weren't able to answer while you were writing because they're research questions. So yes, you do probably get a better Sarah if I know what I'm doing with my writing. Yeah.
I'm also a fan of notes to future me in the margin and other ways of doing it. And they will sometimes, if anybody else saw them, I think they'd think they were quite sarcastic, because it will be things like unpick, clarify, solve. And you're just like, well, yeah, obviously. But because I know sometimes I'm not in the mood to do those things, but future me I know will be. One other question sort of around that. I think this is something you're very good with. I don't know if this is a problem that you would have, but something I do see with research and writing is that people can get very good at convincing themselves that they're not procrastinating when one rabbit hole leads to another rabbit hole. And the thing about research into something that you love is all of it can be useful, all of it can be interesting. So it's not procrastination in the sense of doing the washing rather than writing, or making a phone call is procrastination rather than writing. People can sometimes lose the wood for the trees. What would you advise, or how would you experience that?
I've got better at jumping down fewer rabbit holes. I jumped down a lot when I was doing my first book. And then for my second book, I was really disciplined because I thought I don't want to spend another, 6 years between starting and publication? I mean, that wasn't all time spent jumping down rabbit holes. I actually had the basis of 2 other Whitechapel books while I was doing my first book. But I'm more disciplined. And then if I sort of have a bit of overly prolonged research because I am thinking, I'm enjoying this a lot more than writing, or I don't know how to start the writing, then I know that the next day is a writing day. But all of my work is based on research. And when you're writing, you realize that questions arise which you haven't fully covered. And so then you have to go back and do a little bit more research, but not necessarily at that time. As you say, you can make notes and say, what is the date of this? What happened after that? And they can be a little bit sort of like having an irascible tutor or something, but you're just writing a note to yourself. But it's very much like, what?
Yeah. It is a relationship between selves, isn't it? But if you're in the mood for more research, that's fine. But you need to give that other you a bit of time later for more writing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a balancing act like many things.
I wonder if there is a ritual or an approach. Is there something that, if you could go back through time and tell yourself, this works for me, is there something that particularly works for you that you'd like to share with other writers?
What always works for me is reminding myself of my motivation, that I love writing books. It's wonderful to finish a book, and that I am inspired by my family history. And this really works for me. This is where I'm grounded, that's what I want to do. But I mean, in a practical sense, I like physically going to the archives and the library. Even if I'm not consulting papers or books there, I find that helpful. I like walking. I like walking in Whitechapel, and I like going to places where my family have lived in the past. I'm going tomorrow to a place off the Miniseries in the City of London where my police ancestor once lived. I'm actually showing another podcaster the location. We're going to have a bit of chit chat on location. I think it's going to be great. So I sort of have to reconnect with my inspiration, and I do that in my own way. Sometimes I just look at photos. It could be almost anything. And then that's very helpful for me personally. But maybe that's a bit eccentric and not what other people do.
Well, with any luck, the more eccentric, the better, because the more individual, the more we know it's right for us. But I wonder then, so speaking of locations, when you were on the Lucy Worsley programme, that must have felt a very literal acknowledgement of your journey, because you are then on location based on your research, based on all of your family history.
It was a real gift to me. I love sharing my work with other people. So this show was based on the subject of my second book, Arm of Eve. And yeah, to go with Lucy Worsley to these key places. So the Waterman's Steps, where my prime suspect, James Crick, plied his trade. To go there with her and talk about his crimes. He was prosecuted for 2 very serious assaults on women. I mean, that was just incredible for me. And now it's captured on film and people can watch it. It's wonderful. And we also went to Westminster Bridge, which is the most beautiful location, where he accosted one of his victims. And then we went to the Inner Temple Library, which was meant to be a location which represented archives. And this is where you have the shot of me poring over the books, which were actually very, very beautiful Victorian books about rainfall in India. And I was meant to be pretending to be fascinated by it. But obviously, being something of a geek, I was thinking, oh, they've made these records, they've written it down, they've kept it, they use it for these reasons. So I was actually quite fascinated.
And it's an important story, actually, isn't it, for freelancers in particular, because everything that your career does, every path that has some of your interests in, can lead to more interest. So building a freelance career, which, I mean, Sarah and many other clients I work with, there will always be some element of fear of the unknown, but there will also be so much opportunity with the unknown.
I do enjoy that very, very much. And I think also we are helped by serendipity. I've really been helped by random and chance occurrences, strange discoveries, bumping into people who've proved to be very helpful in my life or even connected to me in some way. It's been quite incredible. So I think we are helped if we step out into the unknown. I don't really feel we're ever fully alone. I think there are sources of support which become apparent to us, I believe.
And speaking as somebody who has shown up for writing coaching and opened that door and taken support that's available, what would you say to people about that experience?
I've very much enjoyed working with you as my writing mentor and coach. I think it's really important to get sources of support because it's a lonely business being a writer. And sometimes you just want to talk to someone who is neutral, you know, not a friend, not a fellow writer, not a family member, whoever it is, but someone who actually understands what it's like to be a writer, and also to explore the processes which work or don't work and how to adjust them to make them better. And so you've helped me enormously, I feel, in my routine and in very practical ways. You know, you've said to me, what do you need to do this week? How can I help you with that? And I'm suddenly thinking, well, you could help me so much with my social media planning, something very, very specific that I feel, you know, I'm still on a learning curve with. And yeah, so that's been really important to me, and I thank you for it.
And I thank you for being open to it, because that example is so important for listeners, is that this is not either for beginners or expert, published or unpublished. We all feel like we're beginning at some level at something, and we can all, as you've said about so many things today, reach out for the help that is there and keep growing. And I love seeing what an example of all of that richness your career is. And I'm really looking forward to seeing more of what happens next. That was glorious. Thank you so much. Sarah Bax Horton, thank you for joining the Writers' Gym.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach, Dr Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory. To join a Writers' Gym workout online or in London, as a guest or as a member, visit writersgym.com or email thewritersgym@rachelknightley.com.